Paul, do we have,
I don't know if Elaine's kind of got her.
Elaine is not going to be here.
Oh, she's
that
not.
right?
might be.
Oh,
How spent are we in contingency right now?
Sorry.
We're not offended.
Yes.
Not much.
All right.
Transfer.
I was gonna say, we still pre-transferred, right?
I think we're going to
Rock and roll.
start here. It's showtime. Are we all set? Are our cameramen all set and everything? Great. All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to ask you to stand. Welcome to the May Board of Finance hearing, or meeting. I'm going to ask Mr. Hiller to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please.
I pledge
pledge
allegiance
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Typically, at this meeting of the Board of Finance each year, we have a very short agenda. To set the tax rate based on the recently completed budget, as well as to appoint the auditors for the next fiscal year. And this is, these are both time-sensitive events and things that need to be completed this week. This year, we've had several other items added to the agenda, including approval of many, many months worth of minutes, an item from the Department of Public Works on the Water Pollution Control Authority, and a bond appropriation requested by the Riverfield School Building Committee. I've discussed with several members of the board during the day, making sure that these items get a fair discussion and a fair hearing. And given the events of the past week or so, I'm concerned, and several members are concerned, that might not be possible tonight. So what we had discussed, or I had discussed independently with some people, was moving some items off this agenda to our next regularly scheduled meeting, so that we could take them up without the glare of the recently completed budget deliberations and what we need to do tonight staring us in the face. So I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to comment on those thoughts, and then I can entertain a motion.
Motion.
Mr. Polito, okay. So what is your specific motion?
Mr. Chairman, my motion would be to table to a date certain, that being our next regularly scheduled meeting, items 2 and 3, and 1 as well?
Yeah.
And 1 as well. So items 1, 2, and 3 to be tabled from our agenda this evening and put to the agenda of our next regularly scheduled meeting.
Do I have a second to that motion? I've got one from Mr. DeWitt. Any questions, comments, concerns from board members? Mr. Stone?
The only thing I'm having a problem with is the minutes, because we're gonna set the mill rate. Shouldn't we approve these minutes before we do that, or it doesn't matter?
It does not matter if we do. In the past, we have done it separately
Fine.
from a procedural standpoint, but if it's your preference to do it this evening?
I'd rather not. But
Okay. Mr. Hiller, I'm correct, am I not?
So,
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mrs. Leclerc?
Can I just confirm with Mr. White that that it's okay to postpone that item, that the timing of it doesn't matter?
Mr. White, please.
No
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I do also want to acknowledge Mr. Quinn, who's here from the Riverfield School Building Committee, and I thank you, sir. And I'm glad we had the opportunity to speak briefly beforehand. And Mr. White, I'd like to thank you as well. And my apologies and sincerest regrets for any inconvenience this may cause you. And if you have anything you'd like to say, I'll open this up to public comment now. Anybody? No? Seeing none, we'll come back to the board, and I'll ask for a vote on this item. All in favor of moving items number 1, 2, and 3 on this agenda to date certain, the June monthly meeting, the June 5th meeting? Thank you, Mr. Hiller. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Those items are moved. Thank you. We'll now jump to item number 4 on our agenda, which is to appoint the auditors to conduct the audit of the town's financial records for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2012. We do have Mrs. Leclerc here, who's the chairwoman of our audit committee. Mr. Hiller, you've been responsible for discussions with our auditors. Can you please bring us through this item?
First off, I think as this board is aware, we went through an RFP process 3 years ago. And the subcommittee at that time, chaired by Mrs. Leclerc, selected the firm of Gaston Rufkus, which has since evolved into J.H. Cohen this past winter. And in fact, our most recent audit was issued under the name J.H. Cohen. Their proposal, and this is the fourth and final year of that proposal, for the year ending June 30th, 2012, their actual bid price was $101,250. Within the contract, or the engagement letter, which they have presented to us just this past week, they propose a fee of $91,900. I believe, and I don't want to speak for Mrs. Leclerc or other members of the board, but I think the board has been generally pleased with the efforts that the firm has put forward. This would be the 6th year, and obviously I think the audit committee may want to review that situation at the conclusion of this year to see whether we do an RFP next winter or whatever. But
Mr. Hiller, this is the same firm as well that did the work on the Metro Center review
that
as
is
well.
correct.
And everyone was quite pleased with that report.
Right. I think they went above and beyond what we expected of them. They really worked hard on that.
Okay. Mrs. Leclerc, anything else you'd like to add at this point?
I don't think
No
so.
problem.
Oh,
No?
I don't know if Jim and Ken would.
Jim or Ken? Ken, please.
Thanks. Actually, well, I actually had a question or two for Paul.
Please.
One is, and I think you partially answered it with your comment a second ago, that you're saying this will be our 6th year with this
That is correct.
audit firm. Is it, and maybe Mary, I'll address this to you as well, you have an expertise in this, is it typical to have a certain amount of time with an auditor so you get a fresh, I know I'm on the board of a charitable organization, and we switched auditors this year strictly, not because we were disappointed in their performance, but because we felt it was appropriate to have a fresh set of eyes come in and look it over. So I guess the question is, it's obviously too late now to go for this year, but should we be?
there's, in a sense, two answers. Many, many years ago, the town had an unfortunate situation, and an audit firm and a tax collector, and the Board of Finance at that time developed a policy of 4 years on, 4 years off. At that time, some of the bigger firms were involved. They say the big firms, which are now consolidated down to the big four, which frankly, the big four do not do municipal audits. In those days, the town used to rotate KPMG, well, it started as Pete Warwick, but then eventually KPMG, and Haskins themselves, which is now Deloitte and Touche. And there was a four on, four off rotation. This board, over many, many years, whereas recently, going back, I think, to 1997, which was the last year with KPMG, went to the more regional firms, moderate in size, as is J.H. Cohen. There are probably, if we did every RFP right now, I think other communities that are doing it, there's probably 4 or 5 firms that might respond for a community of our size.
So in a nutshell, it sounds like, at the very least in our committee, Mary, it might be worth discussion as to whether
Yeah.
six years might be enough time to have, at least consider the option of looking into other firms. Is that a fair?
Right. Right, I think this was the last year of the bid, so
Yeah,
that's
we
why.
really kind of redid it
Okay.
about 3 years ago.
Right, I think it was 3 years, yeah.
This being the 4th and final year of, there were a few concerns, I think, that Mr. Sanabani and the firm made, were responsive to concerns that were expressed after the first 2 years, and there were 3 responses, I think, when we kind of reissued the RFP 3+ years ago, and stayed with them. Before we'd been with the firm of Scully and Wolf, which is now Bloom Shapiro. And Bloom Shapiro has done other work for the town, as you probably know.
So, and a quick follow-up would be, and we're anticipating that Mr. Sendafani, who I've been pleased working with, will be the lead guy in our...
He'd be the engagement partner, correct.
Well, I'd certainly recommend that we approve this for this year.
That,
Thank you, Mr.
that is our other option is, when we had Scully and Wolf, we did at a certain point ask to rotate the audit partner and bring in new staff. And they did that, for a couple of years, 1 year. So that would be an option we could consider if you wanted.
And that has been my experience in public accounting as well. To Mrs. Leclerc's comments that a lot of times you stay with the same firm,
Bring a new set
but
of
they rotate audit partners, and sometimes that's not even the client's request, that's an audit firm practice. I think, Mary, what I've seen is 7 years. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that's but that's what I've seen in the past.
Can vary.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just as a follow-up to Mr. Flynn's comments, we did receive notification from OPM, State of Connecticut, and not to run to the gun, but this appointment must be made by June 1, 2012. And since this board is not scheduled to meet prior to June 5th, in order to comply with OPM guidelines, tonight's the night.
Thank you, Mr. Hiller. Mr. Brown, did you have anything to add being a member of the committee?
Nothing to add?
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns from board members on this item? Seeing none, we'll go to the public. Any questions or comments on this? None there. Back to the board. I'm going to ask for a vote on this item. It's item number 4, to appoint the auditors to conduct the audit of the town's financial records for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2012, and that audit firm would be J.H. Cohen. Okay. All in favor of this item? Opposed? Abstentions? The item carries. All right. Now, item number 5 on the agenda. To consider and set the mill rate for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2012, and ending June 30th, 2013. Everyone will recall this is an annual event after the conclusion of the budget process and the approval of a budget by the representative town meeting. Our board meets after a calculation done by Mr. Hiller to set the mill rate based on the spending approved by the RTM. So, Mr. Hiller, I'll turn it over to you so you can walk us through the calculation.
Thank you, sir. As you're aware, after 2 nights of debate, discussion, dialogue, the RTM last evening approved a budget. I did pass out to the board the budget control sheets as approved by the RTM with a final budget of $272,282,694. That budget basically had 3 changes from what was approved by this board back in late March, actually, some 5 weeks ago. There was an appeal by Public Works Department, frankly, an oversight, I believe, on mine and Mrs. Gardner's part. And I don't want to blame you folks, but no one brought it up either. We forgot the $39,000 for the Fairfield Theater Company as far as the utilities, which will be a separate line item within the Public Works budget. A cut of $250,000 to the Board of Education budget, and a cut of $850,000 to the contingency budget, bringing this to the amount that you see before you, $272 million.
Mr. Hiller, what's the total net cut then, or net reduction?
The total net cut was 1,000.
No, 1 million.
1 million.
I wish.
Pretty soon you're talking some serious money. $1,061,000. That's the net. One add, two deducts. $1,061,000. There had been by this board some minor revenue adjustments of other revenue of $25,626,000. Obviously, in calculating the mill rate, we utilize the senior tax. The senior tax relief comes off this because the grand list is brought forward by the assessor, includes funds that are on these properties. Our recommendation, therefore, is a mill rate of, let me go back on the senior tax relief. That's basically the figure that we carried forward from last year. There is no change in the ordinance. The ordinance basically sunsets every 2 years with the RTM and would be up for revision next year.
So approval of this mill rate estimates that seniors would have a reduction to their tax bill, qualifying seniors, of $3.8 million.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. I mean, and I stress the fact that that's an estimate. People have until next Tuesday to file, and obviously there's a flood of activity. And by the time Mr. Ross and his staff have the time to accumulate the data, it will be early June. So this is an estimate based on last year's experience. I'll jump to the bottom in a sense also where there's another estimate on the supplemental motor vehicle tax. Those are our motor vehicles that people buy after October 1st for a 10-month period between October 1st and July 31st, that they would be taxed on a prorated basis. We've taken what we have for the current year, and as a result of what appears to be fairly good auto sales locally and nationwide, we've increased that figure by 5% over what we realized this year. The net on all these ads, subtracts and all is a mill rate of 23.37 mils. This is a little bit below, this is obviously more than a little bit below what we had estimated at 23.50 mils when this board had completed their deliberations some 5 months ago. On a percentage basis, over the current mill rate of 22.47, this is a 4% increase, almost right on the nose of 4%. And questions?
Just a data point, what's our collection currently? And we're collecting at 98.8.
We put it in at 98.8% for.
What was
collection
last year's
rate,
budget, just as I'm
for
trying to-
the next year, this past, current year, we had estimated 98.86.
6, okay.
So it's.
And where are we running now, Mr. Hill?
We ran around, well, we don't know yet because we haven't
Right.
finished.
Yeah.
And we're still in the process of closing out the fourth quarter collections, with the transition in the tax office, and also some individuals who've had, we've been short-staffed, we're short-staffed for the last 2-3 weeks, basically 2.5 people there. So we're running a little bit behind on that.
We were beaten it last time.
But we appear that we were running fractionally ahead of last year. And a lot of that is the efforts that we've done on the tax sale, which, by the way, I might add, has now been scheduled for July 26th if you want to go and watch a tax sale. But there's still some people on it.
Okay. None of us.
Present company excluded.
Okay. Are there other questions on the calculation? Can we keep, let's at the very start of this, keep this narrowly focused to questions on the calculation?
Yep.
And then we can broaden it. Mr. Belita?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hiller, just to get a sense about what this means in terms of real dollars for the average taxpayer. Let's say you had a home that was assessed at $600,000, just to pick a round number that's kind of in the middle. What would this mean in terms of an actual dollar increase from current fiscal year to next fiscal year?
As 600,000 assessment,
Yes, just to pick a number.
that would be $540.
Okay.
That's an easy,
That's the differential in year over year?
yes.
Can I-
Yeah, Mr. Stone, please.
What's the difference between the original 4.5% and this 4%, dollar-wise?
Dollar-wise, we were up at, well, put it this way, we reduced it from where the board was at the end of March by 1/1300ths of a mil. Okay. So basically, what that's going to equate to is for every $100,000 of valuation, we're down $13. You know.
So to Mr. Stone's
To go
point,
to,
6 times 13.
What is a million?
6 times
Mr.
13.
Boleto's
$81.
example of a
$81.
$600,000 assessment, we'd be looking at
Oh,
a
$78.
change of $78,
$78,
$78 less.
Close enough for government work.
Yeah, right.
So it's $78 between the budget that was before us. In Mr. Bolito's example, it's $78.
Yeah, yeah. One thing, and we did do some more refinement, the question is always about the average taxpayer. And
Right.
I've yet to meet the average taxpayer, but
Understand.
that assessment value is roughly, we had given a figure and it was a little high of 460. It's closer to 435 as far as the average residential.
Right.
Yeah.
Understand.
Isolate the
So
residential.
give us those same numbers on your average then as opposed to the 600.
436,000?
435 change.
Average assessment.
I think we've got a couple average taxpayers in the back. Yeah.
A change of $56.55,
So the average change would be $56.55?
56.55.
56.55. And what was the total? The other question was the change over last year?
It goes up 9/10ths of a mil exactly, which is 4%.
Right. So the dollar amount on that, on the 435? You got a calculator?
I don't know if this calculator goes high enough.
There you go.
$9,735,000.
No,
Sorry.
no. What's the difference? I hope we're not charging $9 million in taxes on a $435,000 house. So
You mean?
Year over year.
year-over-year change in taxes.
Year over year,
Dollar
based
amount.
on the
Yeah.
new number,
For
the
the
new budget.
435 assessment. If you took my
Well,
example.
last year's mill rate
Right.
and
Yeah.
this year's grand list, because you got two components to that.
Right.
Right, I
because
understand.
The grand list is up.
I'm just talking to the average taxpayer. Just
600,000?
No,
the 435.
Let's say 435.
Right.
So what's the dollar amount
What's he
year
gonna
over
pay
year?
in taxes?
Exactly.
Right, what's the dollar amount
Okay.
increase year over year?
Who's on first?
What's on second?
Well,
Third
that's
base.
the,
Right.
the $435,000 house is going to pay 10,000, fractionally over 10,000, $10,165.
Okay.
And what's the dollar increase year over year? How much more are they gonna pay this year than they paid
He's
last
going
year?
to pay on the 435 house. He's going to pay $391 more.
Okay, thank you.
And then,
It would have been 56 more.
all right, so before Monday, after the Monday night, then it's 56 less or more?
No, after last night.
After Tuesday night.
After-
Okay, what's
yeah.
the $56 drama? Difference between what we proposed and what the
Right.
RTM
Right.
settled on?
Right.
Exactly.
That's
That's
56,
the
So the RTM
$56.
saved this taxpayer $56.
That's correct.
Got it.
which is about, how
Got
much a
it, okay.
quarter?
What'd you say?
How much a quarter is that?
Okay, good.
Okay. What other questions do we have on the calculations, just so we have it on the table? So we know what it costs the average taxpayer. We know what the change was year over year. Any other questions on the assumptions used here?
No.
Yeah, you got it.
Anybody else?
I
Miss-
think
Mrs.
Chris
Leclerc,
asked it
please.
before, but I didn't quite catch it. The collection rate we used last year?
98.86.
So we're a little lower in collection rate and 9/10 higher in mills.
Okay. Mrs. Leclerc, are you good?
I'm good.
Anybody else?
I'm just doing some math.
Okay. We'll give Mr.
Thank you for the math.
We'll give Mr. Kiley a couple seconds to do his math.
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Open it up more broadly for discussion on this topic. so we don't have to stay to just the calculation now. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Mr. Belito?
Sure, I'll go first. I heard about what happened last night at the RTM meeting, and I have to say, I shook my head and kind of thought to myself, what were they thinking? I have a great deal of respect for many of the individual RTM members and know them to be intelligent people, people who are generally reasonable and have the town's best interest at heart. However, the action taken last night, I believe, was not reasonable and not intelligent. There's no question any objective observer of the facts would take a look at this and say that the action taken last night put the town's AAA credit rating certainly in some degree of jeopardy by taking the contingency down $850,000. We have 5 unresolved union contracts. We have a fire contract that has yet to be ratified. And a lot of the money we put into the contingency fund was specifically earmarked to take care of any retroactive salary increases with those contracts. In addition, this board did a lot of work to address specific areas that Moody's had red flagged us for and given us a negative outlook for. The RTM's action last night basically took that work and torpedoed it. I don't know going forward what the answers are in terms of fiscal responsibility in terms of spending. I agree that that is a discussion that needs to be had. However, last night the RTM took out the one area that we really couldn't afford to be taken out. If they were looking to get $1.1 million in cuts, they could have made additional cuts to the Board of Ed budget. They could have made cuts to the not-for-profit contributions. There were other areas that could have been hit that would have been less damaging to the town's long-term fiscal health. So while I appreciate and respect the RTM a great deal and appreciate the work that they put into this budget, I have to say that last night's action was profoundly disappointing and I think will have a very negative impact on the town's fiscal health going forward. And we're going to have to live with the consequences of that. This is a system of checks and balances, and we have to respect the decision that they made, and we're doing that here tonight by setting the mill rate. So that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you, Mr. Belito. Anyone else? Mr. Stone?
I echo what Mr. Belito says, but a little bit stronger. I think I was very disappointed in the RTM last night. I thought we spent weeks and weeks and weeks on this budget, hour upon hour. We went over it line by line. When we had our budget meetings, which were open to the public, open to the RTM members, very few people were there. No one commented, no one complained. I shouldn't say no one, but very few, as opposed to other years. I thought the budgets that the town employee, the town managers put up to us were very fair. I thought most of them came in at 0 or very little increase. And I think the increases were basically due to contracts or what we had to pay our employees and salaries and benefits. And those are contracts that the RTM itself has to ratify. We don't ratify those. So the RTM sets the mill rate in a sense. They tell us what's going to happen year after year. We're really just working on maybe 25 to 30% of the budget at the most. And personally, I think the budget was very lean. There's only so many paper clips you can not buy. There's so many police cars you can't buy. And I thought that, it was a very responsible budget that from the Board of Selectmen to our board, that we did a very good job and a very responsible job. I thought the RTM was very irresponsible last night. I thought it just, when we have all those meetings and they don't show up and at least give us a hint what's going on, it's wrong. And also, about the cuts, as Mr. Belito said, they could have, they wanted a 2% cut across the board. Well, they should have said where those cuts were. It's not, we cut as far as we could. The first selectman and the Board of Selectmen cut as much as they could. So if the RTM, in their wisdom, can find more cuts, let's discuss them. But don't come to us at the last minute on a Monday night, or whatever it was, and then say you're going to cut it 2%, say you're going to cut threaten to cut the Board of Ed almost $3 million, and then at the end, what did they do? They cut the Board of Ed, they almost wimped out and cut the Board of Ed for $250,000, which was, I don't know where they pulled that number from, because we put the $250,000 back into the budget. And then they the big thing, they spent 2 hours on a tractor or a lawnmower. I just thought it was ridiculous, and I was, embarrassed, to be honest with you. So, the main thing is, with this $800,000 cut, I think they're playing Russian roulette with the town's bond rating. I really do. We worked very hard to get this town in a fiscally responsible situation. And I think when they make a cut like that, it's really wrong. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Anybody else have any questions or comments on this item? All right. So the item is now before us. The mill rate is to be approved. Yeah, is 23.37. And that would support the budget passed and approved by the RTM last evening, correct? Based on these assumptions as laid out here. Any questions, comments, concerns from the public on this item? Yes, Mr. Hurley, please.
Yeah, hi, Michael Hurley.
Go up to the microphone.
Oh, sure. Microphone is...
Right there, I guess?
Right there, I guess.
I can hear you.
Right under the 20.
This isn't our normal venue, so it's...
Okay. Michael Hurley, RTM District 1. As I think everyone in the BOF knows, we've had some assessment appraisal issues in District 1. A lot of people are very upset. I've met with a number of colleagues on the RTM, spoken extensively with Mr. Hiller. First Selectman was kind enough, we sat down, we had breakfast one day, and I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about this board's, desire to look into the matter. I was reviewing the town charter under the Board of Finance, section 8.3, part D, and it says the Board of Finance shall install and shall modernize from time to time a system by which equitable and just values of taxable property within the town may be ascertained. And I'm just curious at this point if, I understand that certain things are set now, and there's a process by which people can appeal, and I think the First Selectman did a good job of articulating how you go about doing that. But as a board, is this something which is sort of on your radar screen that you'll be looking into?
I'll go to Mr.
Or is this
Bolito.
totally off base?
I'll go to Mr. Bolito first, and then Mr. Dwight.
No, it's a fair question, Mr. Hurley. What I will say is that you quoted the charter accurately, but what it says is system. We're responsible for installing the system. We are not responsible for choosing the vendor who conducts the assessments. That is in the purview of the town's tax assessor. So certainly, there were a lot of people in certain neighborhoods who had some complaints about their assessment. There seemed to be a way up and down depending on which neighborhood you lived in. So I think it's certainly fair to question the validity of the assessments, to avail oneself of the process. Just as a personal comment, when I look at the appeal process, perhaps we ought to look at having professionals conduct those appeals rather than well-meaning volunteers who may or may not have expertise in these particular areas. Certainly something to consider for the future. It's out of our purview, but certainly a conversation worth having. But in terms of what our role is and what we do, we set the system, but not the individual vendor. So that's my answer to it.
So just based on your professional opinion as a member of the Board of Finance, you view it as more of a vendor issue as opposed to a system issue?
I think the fact that there are a lot of variances between neighborhoods, it certainly makes one question. But, in terms of whether or not it's a vendor specifically, I think that's what the core process is for, and that's what the appeals process is for. And, maybe next time around, we look at doing things a different way. But, yeah, that's pretty much what I'd say about it.
Mr. DeWitt, you had your hand up.
I have a question back. I don't understand. I did not understand Monday night at the RTM meeting. I did not understand Tuesday night at the RTM meeting. I do not understand right now why we are talking about assessments at a budget meeting. It's a big smokescreen. Big smokescreen. It's a political statement. It's just, it absolutely
No, I
is.
don't think so.
What does this have to do with this budget before us? What does this have to do with the budget before us?
When I spoke to Mr. Hiller on Monday night's meeting, on Tuesday night's meeting, he was very clear that the tax rate in the town is a function of the mill rate times
Right.
the assessment issue.
Right?
And there are issues in District 1 with assessments. You're
Okay.
discussing the mill rate, and that's why my question is posed.
Those numbers
I don't think I need
have-
to be attacked here. I'm asking a question.
First, I'm not attacking you.
You are.
First off,
You
what
are.
I'm saying.
Guys,
First
relax.
off, what I
Guys,
am saying
You are.
is, the numbers are already baked into the estimate. Whether every appeal gets appealed or doesn't get appealed, we have a number in front of us. This is not a budget discussion.
I am just asking a question, if the Board of Finance, given what it says in the town charter, and I'm not saying I'm an expert of what it says in the town charter, of whether it's something you think needs to be looked at. Not a personal attack, I have a great deal of respect for each of you. So
Mr.
thank you.
Stone?
I don't have anything.
No,
I'm not going to be attacked like that personally.
It's not an attack.
all right. What I was going to say is, maybe we should look at that, but the other thing is, we do an assessment every couple of years. I think it's every 5 years. For years, and I'm in real estate, I know, a lot of those properties were underassessed. So this is how you balance it.
Mr. Stone?
Right.
Anyone else? Any other members of the public on this item? Yes, Mrs. Stanley, please. Yes, please, thank you.
Under
Please
the
just
20-ton
identify yourself, yeah,
Okay.
sure.
I'm sorry?
Under the 20-ton weight.
Ann Stamler, 411 Stratfield Road. As a member, as a voter and a taxpayer in the town of Fairfield, but as a member of the representative town meeting, I would just like to speak on the record, speaking for myself, and I think perhaps for a number of people not present this evening, who did not support the move to reduce the contingency fund, that I did not support it. I witnessed the very careful work over many, many months of this board. I've never worked harder to understand a process than I did to understand the building of reserves and the purpose of it. So I would just like to go on record in saying that I did not support that cut. I think it was unwise. I respect every member of the RTM, including the previous speaker. It can't be undone, but an opinion can be expressed.
Thank you, Mrs. Stem. Anyone else? Okay, before I bring it to the vote, I do want to address the assessment comment question. I think Mr. Bolito summed up our role quite well under the charter as it's been explained to us and as we understand it, which is that we are supposed to give the funding and provide the mechanism by which the professionals, the town assessor, administers the program. And it is the town assessor's office, who's forgotten more about assessments than we'll ever know, who works with the professional assessment organization to come up with the initial assessment. Now, clearly, there's some conflict in that process, particularly the last process, given the economic downturn, given some of the disparities in what happened within areas of town, within individual districts. That is why there's a process put in place by the town to administer those disputes. That's why there's a board to appeal it. That's why there's legal process to follow in that. And Mr. Tatro, I'm going to look at you on this. My understanding is that legal process includes hiring yet another assessment firm to address, or does it use the same firm to address on an individual basis anybody's appeals? Can you explain that, please?
Will I get the answer from here or under the 20-pound weight?
Under the 20-pound
Right
weight. In fact, if you wait 2 minutes, we'll add more
Yeah, we'll
weight.
load up.
It might not be a separate assessment firm, but there is an additional assessment done, is that correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
What happens is that, as you correctly pointed out, somebody has an issue with their assessment.
Right.
The way we resolve that agreement, so it's not a function of anybody deciding, yep, you're a good guy, we'll do it, there's no politics
Right.
involved. You go to the Board of Assessment Appeals.
Right,
Some of the assessments are resolved at that point.
yep,
For any that don't, there's a second option, or another appeal step, where they can go and appeal it, as we say in court, that they may or may not need an attorney to do that. They don't have to have an attorney. They can do that pro se without an attorney, and we've, in the past, have helped them with the guidelines and the forms to do that. When they do that, we're actually bringing back the appraiser or the firm that did
Right.
that, and they're providing additional work and support for their opinion of the value of the property. The person appealing would typically bring in an appraisal that they had done.
Right.
Those are discussed and reconciled, and we do our best to come up with a resolution from there.
right. Thank you for the explanation of that. I think it's important that the public know that, because obviously there were issues or concerns with the last process that was undertaken. It's important that the integrity of the process, in my opinion, be followed. It would be unwise for members of our board who are not assessment professionals to address whether we believe that they were fair or unfair, given we don't have all the facts of the circumstances, given we don't have the background, and given the fact that there's a legal process underway, and of which being part of the town government, it's probably not appropriate for us to comment on that matter without having a full range of the understanding. Mr. Tetra?
If I might also offer, just to clarify,
Yep.
that when we do decide to go out for an assessment like this, or a revaluation, and I was sitting on the Board of Finance, we reviewed
Approved it.
the dollars and approved the dollars, but it did go out to bid. So it's an independent firm,
Yep.
chosen by public bid process, so that it's very definitely an arm's length transaction in that
Yep.
regard. There is, once the revaluation of the new grand list comes back, there is a statistical check that is done by the assessor, and he performs a number of tests on it before he signs off on it.
Mhm.
Right. Those were done, and in my discussions with the prior assessor, those tests were passed.
Thank you, Mr. Tetra. One other item on this. I do hear, and I think Mr. Hurley might have mentioned it, others mentioned it, it was a topic of the discussion during the RTM meeting, that people, through the series of campaigns or whatever, had heard kind of the hue and cry about the assessments and all that. And I've always recommended that they avail themselves of the process. I would say that me personally, the stories that really touch me the most for our average taxpayers or our taxpayers were where they had very large increases year over year that placed a severe economic burden on them. And I think that as we move forward, and Mr. Tetra, you weren't in office at the time that this was done as the first selectman, but I think incumbent on all of us to look at is there a process by which if someone gets hit with a substantial tax increase because there was either an error in a prior evaluation or growth in their value of their home for whatever reason, that we look to work with those taxpayers on a system of phasing in that increase, as opposed to somebody seeing a tax increase year over year of $12,000, $15,000, $20,000, which is substantial for virtually anybody. And I don't know what the legality of that is, but I think it's something we should look into, because those are tough calls.
I think without question, I mean, where your heart has to go out to folks is where they saw a tremendous drop. If your
Right.
tax bill went up 20, 30, 40%, which frankly, when I first heard about it, I was floored that there were any adjustments and that they were that big. So in looking at that, certainly, everything I've seen so far, coming into this position when I did, it was after the grand list was finalized. And based on state statute, there's very little that can happen at that point. Prior to that, there's some things, but
Yeah.
as it's been explained to me so far, and it's certainly, as you pointed out, worth a long, hard look, the ability to go back and do exceptional processing for individual taxpayers runs rampant with the potential for
Exactly. It'd have to be a
I don't-
program.
I'm searching for the word at that
Yeah,
point.
it'd have to be a program.
Yes, it would. And so the ability to go back, certainly as we look at the next assessment, to go back and look, and I think there was time from when the assessment came in to explore these options, but more importantly, to get out and communicate with the citizens what's going on, what took place. We knew where the assessments were going up. We could have done some extra training, extra education, extra communication in that to make people aware of it. There were way too many people, I think, were caught by surprise, both because their assessment went up, but in normal years that happened, so it didn't necessarily cause them angst at that point. Some people where their assessment stayed the same and didn't realize because everybody else's went down, that caused you to pay a bigger share of the tax pie than anybody else. I mean, this is all about coming up with a way to make sure everybody's paying their fair share. They shouldn't pay more than that, and hopefully they're not paying less than that. But I think there's some improvements we can make in looking at how we manage the implementation of the new assessment within the state statutes.
And I want to go to Mr. Hiller, because you seem to have a...
There are provisions within the state statute after a revaluation for a phase-in of the assessments, but that's a town-wide phase-in.
Right.
It's not individual to a particular neighborhood or a group of property owners or something like that. That has, it's kind of one size fits all. And that's been done locally by the city of Norwalk, and the city of Milford did it a couple of years ago.
So it would be a program.
And
Yeah.
then Milford did it, it can be up to a 4-year phase-in. I believe it's 4-year under the statute.
Yep.
Milford did it for 2 and then suspended it. And so they've got, if you look at their numbers this year, they've just had a reval. Revals happened, Trumbull and Easton just had revals.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, one of the questions I got early on is, can you go back and redo it for our neighborhood or our section? And the answer is no.
Right.
It's
It's
townwide or it's
townwide.
not. It's got to be one system, because it's timing, it's...
And it cost between $500,000 and $600,000, as I recall. to do
It
that.
did roughly last time. I think we spread that over a couple of
2
fiscal
years. 2
years.
years,
so
yeah.
We didn't see that charge in any one year.
That's correct, yeah.
It's also
Thank
supposed to be revenue neutral.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions, comments on this item? All right, seeing none, anything from the public, one more time. Yeah, please, Mr. Lee.
Hi, I'm Ken Lee. I live at 71 Rhode Avenue. I'm also a representative from District 10. But I'm really speaking as a taxpayer. Our property went up, our property taxes went up last year 24%. So I have some empathy to this subject. The only thing that I'm going to say, and I'll echo Mr. Stone's comment, because had we sold that property in 2007, we would have made a substantial profit because it was undervalued. If we sell that property today, according to our assessment, we would lose money. It's just like a mutual fund. If the market goes down and you sell it, you lose money. If the market's up and you sell it, you make money. It's unfortunate if you end up on the short end of that, no doubt. My only comment on that is that I think that we have two completely separate issues here. We have the subject of assessments, for which there is a process. We have the budget, which is set to fulfill the responsibilities of us to the town, all 60,000 people. While we certainly all have empathy for those, like me, who had a really big tax bill, I don't think that we can spread that tax bill out on the public or reduce their services because of that. I think they're just separate. And I hope that in the future that we manage somehow to be able to separate those two issues and give each one the respect and attention they deserve.
And I think to Mr. DeWitt's point earlier, sir, that's what we did at this table with the budget.
Absolutely. Thank you very much,
So,
gentlemen. I
thank
appreciate
you.
all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Seeing none, before us is a motion. Do I have one? Or I will make one. A motion to set the mill rate for the town of Fairfield for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2013. Thank you for checking me, Mr. Hiller. At 23.37 mils. Do I have a second to that? Mr. Bolito? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. All right. Next item. to hear, consider, and act upon any other communications. Mr. Hiller, I don't know of any. Okay, and the last item, to hear, consider, and act upon any other business which shall come properly before this body this evening. Any others? All right, everyone. Do I have a motion? Mr. Brockfeld, do I have a second? Mr. DeWitt, all in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Abstentions? We're done, everybody. Thank you.